At 10:18 a.m., a nurse crushed my right hand and whispered, "Do not continue this pregnancy. Run." I nodded, even though my husband was 10 feet away in the hallway, smiling into his phone. I was on the exam bed in a private clinic in Heliopolis. The ultrasound gel was cold on my skin. On the counter sat a cup with my name and an envelope stamped blood work. The nurse had closed the door fully. She didn't say it like advice. She said it like a deadline. Then she wrapped the tourniquet around my arm as if nothing had happened. Her eyes stayed on mine. When I mouthed why, she leaned in and added, "I know his family. I've seen this before." A second later, I heard my husband's shoes on the tile. He came in smiling, holding the printed ultrasound photo. He kissed my forehead and said his mother wanted dinner this weekend to celebrate. He didn't look at the nurse. He didn't look at my arm. I smiled back. I said, "Okay." My voice sounded normal. My body didn't. In that moment, I understood the power in the room wasn't mine, and it wasn't his. It was waiting outside the door, wearing a mother's name and expecting obedience. I left with his hand on my back, the photo in his pocket, and the warning stuck to me like a second skin, and a heartbeat still ringing in my ears. By nightfall, I would learn what before meant. We left the clinic at 10:42 a.m. He insisted on driving. I watched the clock on the dashboard flip minutes while he talked about traffic permits and a meeting he might miss. At a red light, he reached into his shirt pocket and touched the ultrasound photo without looking. I kept my hands in my lap and counted breaths. When we parked, he said he needed to send emails. I said I felt tired. That was true. Inside our apartment, he went straight to the desk by the window. I put my bag on the chair and walked to the kitchen. The rice jar was empty. The kettle needed water. Ordinary things kept happening. I opened a drawer and saw the folder where we kept receipts and warranty cards. I took it to the table and added today's clinic receipt, smoothing the paper flat. The nurse's voice came back in a whisper, not louder, just closer. At 11:09 a.m., his phone rang. I recognized the ringtone before he answered. He stepped onto the balcony and shut the door. Through the glass, I could see him nodding. His shoulders relaxed in a way they never did with me. I turned the kettle on. Steam fogged the window. I didn't try to hear the words. I watched his mouth move and counted nods. When he came back inside, he kissed my cheek and said his mother was excited. He said she wanted to bring soup tomorrow for the baby. I asked what kind. He laughed as if I'd missed a joke and said she would decide. He didn't ask how I felt. He asked if I would rest. After lunch, he left for errands. At 12:37 p.m., the door closed. I locked it behind him and sat on the floor by the couch. My phone was in my hand before I knew why. I opened notes and wrote a date and time. I wrote the nurse's words exactly. I didn't add reasons. I didn't add feelings. Just what was said and where. I saved it and turned off the screen. I stood up and walked to the bedroom. In the closet behind winter coats was a small box with old documents. I took out my passport and checked the expiration date. It was valid. I put it back. I took out my bank card and checked the balance. It was not much. I put it back. I took out a spare charger and put it in my bag. I didn't pack clothes. I packed access. At 1:14 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message from his mother. No greeting. Eat well. Avoid lifting. I will send a list. I didn't reply. I took a screenshot and saved it to a new folder labeled medical. That label felt safer. At 1:26 p.m., I called my workplace and said I had an appointment tomorrow morning. I didn't say why. The manager said, "Okay." I wrote the time down. At 1:40 p.m., I opened my email and forwarded myself the clinic receipt from our shared account. I created a new email address and sent it there, then logged out. I went back to the kitchen and washed the cup from the clinic. The name sticker peeled off easily. I stuck it inside the folder with the receipt. The kettle clicked off. I poured water and didn't drink it. At 2:03 p.m., there was a knock on the door. It was our neighbor with a package misdelivered. I thanked her. She asked if I was feeling well. I said yes. She smiled, and left. When the door shut, I slid the bolt. At 2:20 p.m., my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring out. A minute later, a voicemail notification appeared. I didn't listen. I wrote down the time and number. I saved it. When he returned at 3:48 p.m., he carried pastries. He put them on the counter and said his mother wanted to come tomorrow at 3. I said okay. He said we should move closer to her, eventually. I nodded. He asked if I'd told anyone yet. I said no. He smiled and said good. That night, he slept quickly. I lay awake and listened to the building settle. At 11:52 p.m., I opened notes again and added a line, "Pressure begins same day." I turned off the light and stared at the ceiling until my eyes hurt. I didn't cry. I didn't decide anything. I documented. That was the first move I could make without permission. Type continue for T. The next morning started with a schedule I didn't make. At 8:06 a.m., his mother sent a message listing foods I should eat and foods I should avoid. At 8:12, she added a reminder about rest hours. At 8:19, she asked if I had scheduled blood work. I didn't reply. I took screenshots and saved them to the same folder. I changed the folder name to Timeline. At 9 a.m., he left for work. He kissed my forehead and said he'd be late. He reminded me his mother would come at 3. When the door closed, I stood still for a full minute listening for footsteps. Then I picked up my bag and left. I walked to the pharmacy 2 blocks away. I bought prenatal vitamins with cash. I asked for the receipt. I folded it and wrote the date and time on the back. At 9:41 a.m., I crossed the street to a copy shop and made copies of my ID and passport. The clerk stapled them without asking. I thanked him and put them in my bag. At 10:15 a.m., I went to the clinic listed on the receipt. I asked the front desk for the nurse who drew my blood yesterday. The receptionist asked for a name. I said I didn't have it. She shook her head and said nurses rotate. I thanked her and left. Outside, I sat on a bench and checked my phone. A message from his mother at 10:32 a.m. Remember, stress harms the baby. I took another screenshot. At 10:38 a.m., a missed call from an unknown number. I saved it. I went home at 11:20 a.m. I cleaned the kitchen. I put away dishes that were already clean. I kept my hands busy. At noon, I opened my laptop and searched public records for his brother's marriage. I found one registry entry from 4 years ago. No divorce record. No death record. I wrote down the registry number. At 12:47 p.m., I searched again with a different spelling. I found a second registry entry from 2 years ago. Different bride. Same absence after the wedding notice. I printed both pages and wrote the source URL at the bottom. I didn't draw conclusions. I just stacked papers. At 1:30 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message from a woman I barely knew, a cousin by marriage. Congrats. His mom is so happy. I replied with a single word. Thanks. I saved the message. At 2:15 p.m., I set the table for 3. I placed the chairs evenly. I put the kettle on. At 2:58 p.m., the doorbell rang. His mother came in carrying containers. She didn't take off her shoes. She went straight to the kitchen and rearranged the counter. She asked if I'd scheduled my next appointment. I said I would. She nodded and said she would come with me. At 3:21 p.m., she took my phone from the table and scrolled. She stopped when she saw the screen lock. She put it down and said I should rest more. She asked where my husband was. I said he'd be late. She said that was fine. She talked about her other grandchildren. She talked about what worked before. She said some women don't listen and then things go wrong. She said this while stirring soup. I watched the spoon circle the pot. I didn't interrupt. At 4:05 p.m., she asked if I'd told my family. I said not yet. She said it was better that way for now. She said she would handle announcements. She said she had experience. I nodded. When she left at 4:32 p.m., she kissed my cheek and said she would call tonight. She didn't ask how I felt. She told me to lie down. I locked the door and sat on the floor again. At 5:10 p.m., I listened to the voicemail from the unknown number. It was a woman's voice. She didn't say her name. She said she worked at a hospital outside the city and asked if I was safe to talk. She left a timestamp. I wrote it down. At 6 p.m., he texted that he'd eat with his mother and come later. I replied, okay. At 6:14 p.m., his mother texted, he is with me. I saved it. I opened notes and wrote, they coordinate. I added the times. I added the registry numbers. I added the voicemail time. I didn't add what it meant. At 7:30 p.m., I packed a small bag. One change of clothes, documents, charger, cash. I put it by the door, behind the shoe rack. At 9:02 p.m., my phone rang. It was him. He asked why I sounded distant. I said I was tired. He said his mother worried about me. He said I should listen to her. I said okay. When he came home at 10:11 p.m., he asked if I'd been anywhere. I said I went to the pharmacy. He asked why. I said vitamins. He nodded. He didn't ask for the receipt. That night, I slept with my phone on silent and my bag by the door. I didn't decide to leave. I decided to be ready. That was enough to force aside, even if no one said it out loud. At 6:32 a.m., I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. It was his mother. I let it stop. 30 seconds later, a message appeared. Appointment moved. Today at 11 o'clock. Be ready. I checked the calendar. No appointment existed. I took a screenshot. He was already dressed. He said he'd take the morning off to support me. He said it while tightening his watch. I asked who moved the appointment. He said the clinic was busy. I asked which clinic. He said the same one. I asked for the address. He paused, then said he'd drive. At 7:10 a.m., I texted my workplace to say I'd be out. At 7:14, I forwarded myself the screenshot of the appointment message to the private email. At 7:20, I put my bag behind the shoe rack again. We left at 10:20 a.m. He drove faster than usual. He took a turn that didn't lead to the clinic. I asked where we were going. He said parking was better this way. I watched the street signs. I wrote them down in notes without looking. At 10:41 a.m., we parked outside a building I didn't recognize. The sign said Family Health Center. He said it was affiliated. The lobby smelled like disinfectant and old paint. There was no line. A receptionist asked for my name. I gave it. She looked at her screen and frowned. She said there was no appointment. He stepped in front of the desk and said his mother had called. The receptionist asked for the name. He said it. The receptionist nodded slowly and said someone would come get us. She didn't ask for insurance. At 10:49 a.m., a woman in a white coat called my name and led us down a hall. She didn't introduce herself. She asked me to step into a room alone. He tried to follow. She stopped him and said protocol. He smiled tightly and waited outside. Inside, the woman closed the door and asked if I felt stressed at home. She asked if I slept well. She asked if I trusted my family. I answered yes, no, and yes. She wrote notes. She said stress can cause complications. She said families sometimes know best. She said she'd run tests. At 11:03 a.m., the door opened. His mother walked in without knocking. She greeted the woman by name. They spoke quietly. I caught the word history. I caught my husband's last name. The woman nodded. At 11:07 a.m., the woman asked me to sign a consent form for additional monitoring. I read it. It allowed information sharing with family contacts. I said I needed time. His mother smiled and said it was standard. I asked for a copy. The woman said they'd print one later. At 11:12 a.m., my husband texted from the hallway. Everything okay? I didn't reply. At 11:15 a.m., his mother said we should reschedule and come back with less tension. She put her hand on my shoulder and squeezed. She said she would arrange everything. She said I should rest. We left at 11:22 a.m. In the car, he asked why I was quiet. I said I needed air. He rolled down the window an inch and turned on the radio. At home, I went straight to the bedroom and locked the door. I called the number from the voicemail. It rang twice. A woman answered and said my name. She said she couldn't talk long. She said she worked nights at a public hospital and had seen 2 women with my husband's last name come in pregnant and injured. She said both lost pregnancies. She said one ran. She said the other disappeared. She said the mother was present. I asked for dates. She gave months and years. I wrote them down. I asked for records. She said she couldn't share them. She said to protect myself. She said to leave before they formalized anything. I asked what that meant. She said signatures. At 12:01 p.m., he knocked on the bedroom door and asked who I was talking to. I said my sister. He said he wanted to hear. I said later. He said his mother worried about outside influence. I said okay. At 12:18 p.m., I emailed myself the notes file. I attached screenshots. I added the street signs from the drive. I labeled the email with today's date. At 1 p.m., his mother called and said she'd scheduled another appointment for tomorrow morning. She said she'd pick me up herself. She said my husband would be busy. I said thank you. I didn't agree. At 2:30 p.m., he left to clear his head. At 2:41, I put my bag on my shoulder and left through the back stairs. I took a taxi to the copy shop and printed the consent form photo I'd taken. It had no clinic stamp. I circled the clause about information sharing. At 4:05 p.m., I met the woman from the voicemail at a cafe near the river. She slid a folded paper across the table. It listed admission dates and discharge notes without names. The handwriting was hers. She said it was all she could do. At 5:30 p.m., my phone lit up with missed calls from him and his mother. I didn't answer. I paid cash and left. By night, they had crossed a line. They expected me not to see. They put it in writing. They said it out loud. They moved appointments. They brought authority into a private choice. That was enough to begin the loop, because now their words had a record. At 7:18 a.m., my phone buzzed with an email from the clinic I had actually visited on Thursday. The subject line read, appointment confirmation. The date was next week. The time was 9:30 a.m. The sender address matched the receipt. I forwarded the email to my private account and added it to the timeline. That made 2 appointments in conflict, one real and one invented. At 7:42 a.m., his mother called. I let it ring. At 7:45, she texted that she was outside. I looked through the peephole. Her car wasn't there. I took a photo of the empty hallway and saved it. At 8:10 a.m., my husband texted, "Open the door. We need to talk." I replied, "At work." He answered, "Your boss called me." I checked my call log. No missed calls. I wrote down the time. At 8:32 a.m., I emailed my manager and asked if anyone had contacted him. He replied at 8:36. No. I forwarded that reply to my private account and labeled it false claim. At 9:05 a.m., I went to the clinic listed on the fabricated appointment. I asked the front desk for a patient advocate. I said I needed clarification about consent forms. They asked for my ID. I gave it. They printed a copy of the form I'd been shown the day before. This one had a stamp. The clause about information sharing was unchecked. The signature line was blank. At 9:22 a.m., the advocate asked who told me the form had been approved. I said a family member. She asked which clinic. I gave the name of the Family Health Center. Her expression changed. She said that center wasn't affiliated. She asked if I wanted to file a complaint. I said yes. At 9:41 a.m., she opened a case. She gave me a reference number. She asked if I felt pressured to sign anything. I said yes. She asked by whom. I said my husband's mother. She asked if the pressure involved appointment manipulation. I said yes. She asked if anyone entered an exam room without consent. I said yes. She wrote it down. At 10:18 a.m., my phone rang. It was my husband. I didn't answer. He texted, "You're making this worse." I didn't reply. His mother texted, "Come home now." I saved both. At 10:40 a.m., the advocate walked me to a private office and explained next steps. She said the clinic would notify compliance. She said my care would be restricted to authorized staff. She said I could list who was allowed information access. I removed all family contacts except myself. She printed the page. I signed. She stamped it. I took a photo. At 11:15 a.m., I went to a notary 2 streets away. I notarized a statement describing the events with dates and times. I didn't accuse anyone of crimes. I described actions. I attached copies of screenshots and receipts. The notary stamped and signed. I paid cash. At noon, my husband sent a long message. He wrote that his mother was misunderstood, that she only wanted to help, that I was being influenced by outsiders. He wrote, "You sign nothing. There is no issue." I replied with one line, "I have a case number." He didn't answer. At 12:37 p.m., his mother sent an email from an address I'd never seen. She wrote that she was concerned and asked the clinic to coordinate. She copied my husband. She didn't copy me. I forwarded the email to the advocate. At 1:20 p.m., the advocate replied that the clinic had received external contact and would document it. She wrote that further contact would be referred to legal. She included the compliance officer on the thread. I saved it. At 2:05 p.m., my husband came to the apartment. He knocked. He said my name through the door. I didn't open it. He said he just wanted to talk. I said, "Through the door? Please email." He said that was unnecessary. I said, "Please email." He left at 2:17 p.m. At 3 p.m., I changed my voicemail greeting to say I was unavailable and to send messages by email. At 3:12, I blocked his mother's number. At 3:15, I unblocked it long enough to capture one more message. She wrote, "We will handle this our way." I blocked it again. At 4:40 p.m., the advocate called. She said the clinic had verified no appointment existed at the other center under my name. She said the center denied involvement. She said this contradicted messages sent to me. She asked if I wanted to escalate. I said yes. At 5:30 p.m., I received a formal acknowledgement email. It listed my complaint, the dates, and the alleged actions. It stated that unauthorized entry into exam rooms and pressure to sign consent forms were violations. It did not name anyone. It didn't need to. At 6:18 p.m., my husband emailed, "We should pause this. My mother is upset." He attached nothing. He offered nothing. I didn't reply. By evening, the loop closed itself. They said appointments existed. Records said they didn't. They said forms were approved. Copies said they weren't. They said influence was care. Policy said it wasn't. I didn't confront them. I let the system answer in writing. The fallout did not arrive as a confrontation. It came as absence. The next morning, my husband did not come home. He sent an email at 8:14 a.m. saying he would stay with his mother until things settle. He asked for patience. He did not ask where I was. At 9:02 a.m., the clinic emailed to confirm my advocate's case number and outlined interim protections. Access notes were locked. Appointment changes required my written approval. Third-party calls would be logged. I printed the email and placed it in the folder. At 10:30 a.m., my husband's employer emailed me by mistake, looping me on a meeting cancellation. The message referenced family matters affecting his availability. I forwarded it to myself and replied that I was copied in error. No one corrected it. By noon, his mother's messages stopped. Instead, emails began. One asked the clinic to release records. Another requested a change of provider. Both were denied. Each denial arrived with polite language and policy citations. I saved them. At 1:47 p.m., my building manager posted a notice about package theft. The camera log showed my mother-in-law entering the lobby the previous afternoon. The manager asked residents to report issues. I did not reply. I downloaded the image. At 3:10 p.m., my husband emailed again. He wrote that his mother felt disrespected and that we should reset boundaries. He suggested a mediator from their family circle. He proposed next Tuesday at his mother's apartment. I replied with one line, "Please email the clinic advocate." He did not. On Wednesday, the clinic sent a system update. New policy language clarified that family members could not schedule or attend appointments without explicit consent. The memo cited recent events. It applied to all patients. I printed it. On Thursday, a compliance officer called to confirm I had received the update. She asked if there had been further contact. I said yes by email. She asked me to forward it. I did. On Friday, my husband missed work. His manager emailed asking if everything was okay. I replied that he should contact him directly. The manager thanked me. Later that day, an automatic reply from my husband's account said he was out of office until further notice. Saturday brought silence. No calls. No messages. I went to the grocery store and paid cash. I bought apples and bread. At the register, the clerk asked if I wanted a bag. I said yes. Sunday, an email arrived from a lawyer's office I did not recognize. It asked me to confirm my address for service. It referenced a separation agreement draft. No attachments. No deadline. I forwarded it to my private account and did not respond. Monday morning, the clinic notified me that an external request for information had been denied and documented. The requester's name was listed. It was my mother-in-law. The note stated that repeated attempts could trigger further review. By midweek, my husband's tone changed. His emails became short. He asked when I would come home. He asked if I planned to keep the baby away from the family. I did not answer questions. I answered logistics. I asked him to email. He missed the next scheduled meeting with the mediator he proposed. His cousin emailed to apologize. She said things were complicated. She asked if I could be flexible. I replied that I would communicate in writing. The errors multiplied on their side. Dates were wrong. Claims contradicted records. Emails were sent to the wrong recipients. One message intended for the clinic came to me instead, asking how to reframe the narrative. I forwarded it to compliance. There was no argument to win. Control slipped through missed steps and paper trails. I remained quiet and followed procedures. The system did the rest. During this period, the administrative details kept arriving without warning. A calendar invite appeared, then vanished. A shared account password was reset, then reset again. Utility bills went unpaid, and late notices followed. I paid nothing. I recorded everything. A courier attempted delivery twice and left slips with times written in pen. I photographed them. The building issued a parking warning with my husband's plate listed. I saved it. A human resources form asked him to verify dependents. It remained incomplete. A payroll notice flagged missing paperwork. His access badge stopped working for one afternoon, then resumed. The clinic sent a brief survey asking if I felt pressured. I checked yes and submitted. No one called. Nothing dramatic happened. The pattern continued. Requests denied, processes stalled, and explanations that didn't align. I stayed reachable by email only. I slept early. I woke early. I ate what I bought. Each day ended without resolution, and that was the point. Control does not collapse loudly. It thins out through small failures that cannot be argued with. I closed the folder, set the alarm, and waited for morning without checking messages or making calls. The separation finalized without a meeting. The papers arrived by courier on a Tuesday at 9:16 a.m. The envelope listed my address correctly for the first time in months. Inside were standard forms, a proposed date, and a note requesting signatures by the end of the week. No apology, no explanation. I signed where indicated, scanned the pages, and returned them the same afternoon. I kept the originals in the folder and placed it on the top shelf of the closet. I moved 3 weeks later. Not far, just enough that the grocery store changed, and the bus number did not. The new apartment had one bedroom and a narrow balcony. The paint was uneven. The locks worked. I carried my own boxes up 2 flights of stairs and set them down where they fit. I kept the bag I packed that first night by the door until everything was unpacked. Then I emptied it and folded it flat. My prenatal care continued on schedule. Appointments stayed where they were put. Forms stayed unsigned, unless I signed them. Calls went to voicemail. Emails came with reference numbers. The advocate checked in once more to say the case was closed with findings noted. She wished me well. I replied, "Thank you," and archived the thread. My phone number changed. My email address did not. Messages from him arrived twice more, weeks apart. The first asked if we could talk. The second asked if I needed anything. I did not answer. After that, nothing. The physical change was small but obvious. I cut my hair shorter. It dried faster. It stayed out of my face. No one commented except the cashier at the bakery downstairs, who said it looked practical. I agreed. I worked until my due date. On my last day, I cleaned my desk and labeled a folder for the person who would take over. I left my badge on the counter and took the stairs. Outside, it was warm. I waited for the bus and watched the number appear on the sign. My son was born early on a Thursday morning. The room was quiet. The nurse asked who should be listed. I said only me. She nodded and wrote it down. The paperwork was short. The bracelet went on his ankle. I held him and watched the clock move. Life did not reset. It continued. Diapers, appointments, receipts, sleep in short stretches. My sister visited on Sundays. She brought soup and left before dark. We talked about schedules. We talked about weather. We did not talk about the past. Once, months later, I ran into his cousin at a pharmacy. She said hello and asked how I was. I said fine. She asked about the baby. I said he was healthy. She looked relieved and then unsure what to say. We paid and left in opposite directions. The folder stayed in the closet. I did not open it again. I did not need to. When mail arrived with his last name misspelled, I recycled it. When an unfamiliar number appeared, I let it ring. When a mutual acquaintance asked if I would ever explain, I said no. There was a morning, a year later, when I walked past the old clinic by accident. The sign had changed. The entrance looked the same. I crossed the street and bought coffee. I stood at the counter and waited for my turn. The barista called my name. I took the cup and left. The last change was the smallest. I stopped checking the time when I locked the door. I stopped counting steps to the bus. I stopped saving screenshots. The notes app stayed empty. The phone stayed quiet. On a Sunday afternoon, my son slept on the couch while light moved across the floor. I folded laundry and listened to the building settle. The future did not announce itself. It showed up as clean bottles in the rack and a calendar with next week filled in. Nothing was returned. Nothing was taken back. No one admitted anything. The systems kept their records. The apartment stayed small. The day ended when it ended. That was enough.